All right, Shalom. I want to start out by giving all praise, honor, and glory due to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I like to give double honors unto the apostles and the earth is a great millstone, who learned is true from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today is March 9th, 2026, Missile Monday, and I have this article from Forbes, and it says Iran's real nuclear option isn't a bomb. It's the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm just going to go into this article or be out a few scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And it says, for decades, global attention has focused on the potential red line of Iran's nuclear program. Intelligence agencies track centrifuge installations, debate enrichment levels, and speculate about the possibility of a nuclear breakout. Excuse me. It says, but while the world has been watching Iran's nuclear program, it has a far more Slovakia. It says it has a far more immediate strategic lever. Iran's most powerful weapon is not a bomb, but it's like it is the geography it controls. So pretty much the region where Iran is. It says the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow shipping corridor between Iran and Oman. If that passage is effectively closed or significantly restricted for any sustained period, the economic consequences could rival those of a major military escalation. Markets are already reacting to the possibility. West Texas Intermediate crude oil has soared past $110 per barrel as traders price in rising geopolitical risk. But that move may only represent the early stages of a potential energy shock if tensions escalate further, which they will, because again, gas prices have went up, at least here in Michigan alone. Gas prices have went up, I think they said, 50 cents? So gas has increased. It says the real issue is not simply higher fuel prices, it is the vulnerability of a global energy system that depends heavily on a handful of critical transit routes. The world's most dangerous energy checkpoint, the Strait of Hormuz, is the most important choke point in the global oil system, and it may also be Iran's most powerful strategic weapon. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply flows through the narrow waterway, making any distribution, Slovakia, making any disruption there a potential shock to the global economy. For decades, analysis and policymakers have warned about the possibility that Iran could close the strait in the event of a military confrontation, which again, they're at it with, Israel and the U.S. It says each time tensions escalate, the question resurfaces, could Iran actually do it? And yes, they can. The answer is not as complicated as many people think. It comes down to geography and mathematics. The mathematics of a choke point says the Strait of Hormuz between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. On the map, it appears wide enough that closing it might require a large-scale naval battle, but global shipping doesn't work that way. Commercial vessels follow strict maritime traffic lanes designed to prevent collisions and maintain orderly transit. In the case of Hormuz, those lanes compress the movement of the world's oil supply into a remarkably narrow corridor, and that creates a powerful choke point. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is about 21 miles wide. That may sound spacious, but tanker traffic does not spread across the entire waterway. Instead, ships follow a traffic separation scheme consisting of two shipping lanes, roughly. Man, this page keep jumping. It's like you. It says that may sound. It's like you know. It says instead, ships follow a traffic separation scheme consisting of two shipping lanes, roughly 2 miles wide each, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. In practical terms, the arteries of the global oil system are compressed into just a few miles of navigable water. Even more significant is the geography. The northern shipping lane runs relatively close to Iran's coastline. From shore-based positions, Iranian forces can easily cover the entire transit corridor with anti-ship missiles, drones, artillery, and radar systems. The ships themselves are hardly difficult targets. Modern supertankers can carry 2 million barrels of crude oil and move slowly through the confined channel. Their size and predictable routes may take them highly visible and vulnerable. It's like it may make them highly visible and vulnerable. But missiles are only one part of the equation. Naval mines are among the most effective tools ever developed for shutting down narrow waterways. Iran has spent decades building that capability, and even a relatively small number of mines can hold commercial shipping. You don't think it's like you don't need to sink dozens of ships. Once a single tanker hits a mine, or insurers believe the threat is credible, traffic can stop almost immediately. Military planners call this anti-access area denial strategy. The goal is not to defeat the U.S. Navy in open battle. The goal is to create conditions so dangerous that commercial shipping simply refuses to enter. And yeah, man, I'm not going to read the whole article, but it's just basically going into how, a nuclear option, again, isn't Iran's only threat to the U.S., but again, the Strait of Hormuz. So that shipping way, they said it where 20% of the world's oil comes from. And if they shut that down, then again, it's gonna have an effect on the global economy, you know. And then with this conflict that the U.S., excuse me, the land of I'm just gonna say, just in case they try to take the video down, the land of where the rats dwell today, they're at it, with Iran. And again, just 1 week has passed, and since, that attack, and then, their Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, yeah, that's his name, Ali Khamenei, was killed, during those particular strikes, and then they put his son in there, and then he was also injured, I think, literally a day after he was put up as their leader, so it's getting real, man. And Just me personally, like I stated before, I personally believe that Iran does have nuclear weapons that, they just have them hidden, and they obviously haven't disclosed publicly, that they do have nuclear weapons or where they have them stored, because again, that's one thing that, Netanyahu, I'll take that term from the elder Yashawamba, Netanyahu, which he's been saying for, 30 years now, that, Iran has WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, which again, I believe they do. I'm not saying it's fact, but just the way that things are going, especially now, I believe that they do have them. And then especially with, them being allies with Russia, I wouldn't be surprised if, they were being aided by Russia or Russia gave them, you know, either uranium or whatever they needed to, develop or just straight up gave them missiles, It wouldn't be surprising. But, we're going to see, because a lot of brothers, are bringing out a lot of information on the conflict that Iran is having, with Israel and the United States right now. We're going to see how long this carries on because, again, the longer it drags on, man, it's going to be, it's going to continue to have an effect on the economy, not just here in America, but, throughout the world, But right now, as of, just 1 week alone, man, we've seen it, I personally, we spoke about it at camp, because gas prices have increased and who knows how much more they're going to increase the longer this particular war, goes on. So I'm just going to read a couple scriptures. Not going to make this one too long and I'll order after that. It's lucky on my phone. It's moving a little slow. So there's the book of Revelation, chapter 11 and verse 14. And it says, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. And right, World War I came to pass, World War II came to pass, and now we're on the verge of World War III, coming to pass. Because we can see it with these particular things that are going on, which World War III has officially started, but we know it won't kick up into a full-scale hot war until, first and foremost, the prophecy of Revelation, the 13th chapter, verse 16 to 18, the mass implementation of the mark of the beast, where the majority of the people, in the world will receive it, which the mark of the beast is the RFID microchip. It hasn't been pushed upon the people yet, So until, that prophecy comes to pass, this war won't come to pass. But again, it's still heating up, the pieces are being set, I'm trying to, phrase it, correctly, but pretty much everybody's, just playing their role, because the Lord is getting these nations ready to go to war with each other and ultimately to try, keyword, try to fight our Lord and the angels. But we know that they're going to fail, they're not going to win. But this is what the Lord is doing, man. He's getting these nations ready to go to war with each other over there in the east, so. So let's grab this in the book of Revelation chapter 16 and verse 12. And it says, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of kings, and that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared and right. If the Euphrates River by now isn't completely dried up as of yet, it's almost dry, because again, the last time I looked into it, it was almost dry, man, but if it isn't completely dry by now, then, it's going to be completely dry soon. So that way these nations can fight each other, because that's where they're going to fight each other, over there in the east, the region of Saudi Arabia, that's where the World War III is going to take place. But of course, America is going to be destroyed in the process. While, the ground troops are going to be in the east fighting, once these nukes get shot off, the majority of them are going to hit this place, and like I've also said, I personally believe, America, is going to bomb back, they're going to get their licks in, or she's going to get her licks in too. But those lands that do get hit outside of, America and Israel, we would just have to wait and see, because again, every nuke that is on this earth is going to be used, so we'll see if Russia gets hit, China, North Korea, any, nation that America is against right now. We'll see, but as it stands, the two confirmed lands that are going to get hit and be destroyed is America, aka Babylon the Great, and the land of Israel, because again, Israel will be built back up. It won't be left desolate like how America is going to be left desolate, pursuing to Isaiah the 34th chapter, which gives a very, very vivid description of how America is going to look once that fire goes out, man. This land is going to be completely desolate, and no one will ever dwell here again. Man will never dwell in this land again. Only desert creatures, and it lists those particular desert creatures, that are going to live here. So let's get the book of Malachi, chapter 4, and verse 1. And it says, "For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch." And right, man, that's the day that's coming, World War III, because again, just like I read that Revelation 11 and 14, man, that third war is coming quickly, and we can see it. It's on the way. We don't know how soon it's going to take place, but we know that it's going to take place soon. Like again, we're all going to, keeping our eyes, on this war between, Iran, Israel, and the United States. We'll see how long it drags on. It may die down for a minute, but then again, it may not. Again, we just have to wait and see what exactly happens, because we know that, again, the longer this war continues, the more and more it's going to have an effect on the world economy, because right now the U.S. is being affected by it, because again, if fuel prices increase, it's going to be more and more difficult, because again, the main way that, food is brought into, these grocery stores here in America is what? By way of trucks, those semi trucks, and, they take diesel fuel, and diesel fuel is not cheap, It may vary from cost, the cost of it may vary, from state to state, but overall, if fuel continues to increase, then man, it's going to be more expensive for, truckers to be able to bring food to grocery stores, because they can afford the fuel. So therefore, food won't be getting into these stores, which again, that's going to lead to, the famine, the literal famine, man, the lack of food that is going to be out here, because again, food isn't being brought to stores, and grocery stores only have about 3 days worth of food, and that's one thing people are going to do, once supplies start running low, they're going to storm the grocery stores, steal whatever they can, and it's going to be left empty. And then they're going to have to ration out food. But again, we'll see exactly how everything plays out, with this war. Excuse me. Because this is not going to be how traditional warfare was fought either. So this is the book of Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 5. And it says, "For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood, but this should be with burning and fuel of fire," right? Traditional warfare, you have a nation of men on one side of the battlefield, coming up against another nation of men on the battlefield, and they're charging each other in the center, having, different weapons of war, swords, spears, shields, bow and arrows, different weapons of war, going at it, hand-to-hand combat. This coming World War is primarily going to be fought with these nuclear missiles, man. And as I always make mention, you will have ground troops, that are going to be going to war with each other, but this war is primarily going to be fought with this nuclear technology that is on the earth today, So I'm going to get the book of Joel, chapter 3, and verse 9, and it says, "Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak see I am strong and right." This is what these different nations are doing. They're exhausting their resources into, their military. Hence the term guns and butter. The guns being their military, the butter being, their economy, taking care of the people. But right now, that's where the majority of, these different nations' resources are going, into their military, because why? We're in a time of war. Pursuing to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 8, where it says a time of war. That's the time that we're in, man. We're in a time of war right now. War is in the air, and this is all you're hearing about. Hence Matthew 24 and verse 6, you should hear of wars and rumors of wars, because again, we're hearing of wars and there's still wars going on. Even though you don't hear about it as much now, Russia is still at it with Ukraine, China and Taiwan, India and Pakistan, and right now, Israel / the United States with Iran. These are the wars and rumors of wars, man. And we're getting that much closer to that great day of the Lord. So I'm going to end it with this. This is the book of Revelation, chapter 9, and verse 15. And it says, "And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men." And right, when you read in Revelation, the 7th chapter, it mentions the 4 angels, which these are 4 little angels holding back, the 4 winds, which the 4 winds represent the destruction, aka World War III, that's going to take place on the earth, because there is a set time when the Heavenly Father wants this to happen. There's a particular, hour, day, month, and year when it's going to happen. And it says what? To slay the third part of men. Because you have 3 classes of men on the earth. You have the sons of God, which today are the biblical Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, the tribe of Judah, all the way down to the tribe of Issachar. You have these sons of men, which are the different heathen nations. And you have the sons of the wicked, which today are the nation of Edom, which is the so-called white race, which they're the third part of men, because that's who this destruction is for, Edom, But 2/3 of the nation of Israel are going to get caught up in this destruction, for their wickedness. And then, you heathens that aren't able to return to your homeland before this war fully kicks off, you're just collateral damage. Your purpose was just to come to Babylon, make a little money, and then die, and you're going to come back as a slave. But either way it goes, the World War III is on the way. We can see it, but we still have to keep in mind that Revelation, the 13th chapter, verse 16 and 18, the mass implementation of the mark of the beast has to come to pass first before this war can take place, which it is a very, very exciting to see, these things happen, So, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from, and I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.